Hello, I'm Dr. Cathy Paessun, the host of the podcast Reinventing Retirement. I am so excited to have today's guest with us. You are going to learn so much from this amazing man. Richard Eisenberg is an award-winning journalist and author. Richard has nearly 50 years of covering personal finance and retirement topics in his writings. He's actually the former executive editor at Money Magazine. He's the former managing editor at Next Avenue on PBS. He is currently a book reviewer for People Magazine. He's also the author of the column The View from Unretirement, which appears in Market Watch magazine, and the co-host of Friends Talk Money podcast. Richard, welcome. I am so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Kathy. It's a delight to be here.
Great. Did I include all of your accolades properly?
More than enough. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, Richard, you've spent your career writing and talking about writing about money and then people in retirement, going into retirement. Now you're teaching people that people may not want to retire at all. How did that happen? Tell us about that.
Well, I sort of grew into it. I started at Money Magazine right out of college as a fact checker. And at the time, I was in my 20s and I was writing mostly about personal finances for people in their 30s and 40s. That was at a time where a lot of people were just trying to learn more about personal finances. And it was a time where there were a lot of things coming onto the market that could be helpful, but they didn't know much about them, like IRAs. And then I got older. And as I got older, I found that people my age wanted to learn other things, particularly about financial planning and personal finance as it relates to preparing for retirement and then for being in retirement. And so in the past few years, I've been doing a lot of writing for people over 50 and doing a podcasting about that as well.
Yes. And as I'm sure you know, right now, 70% of the wealth is held by people 50 and older. I think the number is still a really large percentage for those of us 60 and older. It's a time when the retired or the 60 plus population holds more wealth than we ever have before. It's so important for us to have this information. And you have an amazing career. And when you think about actually the length of our careers, we remember the introduction of 401ks and
Yeah.
IRAs and that sort of thing. This is something new. And I was thankful to be working for a banking organization when all that was introduced. But so back to the beginning when you started, 20 something, writing for older people what to do with their money. First of all, did you ever imagine you'd still be working after quote unquote retirement age?
Um, I guess I wanted to keep working as long as I found it interesting and was able to. And so I assumed that that would probably mean I would do it till I was around 65 or so. I'll be turning 70 in July, and I'm lucky to say that I'm still able to do it and people still let me do it. But it's a very tough field right now in journalism. There are a lot of people who would like to keep writing and editing, and they're finding it harder and harder to get places that will let them do it.
Right. Yes. And hopefully we can jump into more about that later. We'll see where this conversation takes us. But was there an actual moment when retirement, and I guess I'll even be as bold as to say traditional retirement, just no longer seemed the right decision for you? You wanted to make it something different.
Yeah, well, when I was at Next Avenue, that's a website from PBS for people over 50. I was the managing editor and I edited the money and the work channels. I was part of the launch team. I was there for 10 years. And as I was turning 65, I was thinking that I'd like to, I enjoyed my job very much. I loved what I was doing, but I wanted to have time to do some other things that I couldn't do when I had a full-time job. So that's when I told my bosses I wanted to leave Next Avenue to start what I call my unretirement. And that means for me, working sometimes with people I want to, doing what I want to as much as possible, and also learning new things and also having time to do things like volunteering and travel and spending time with family, the kinds of things that I felt like I couldn't do when I had a full-time job. So I would say that's when I decided that that was going to be my definition of retirement. My wife tells me I'm not retired. I think that I am. So we agree to disagree.
So far, has anything about your decision, I'll say your phase of life right now, the unretirement, has anything about this phase surprised you?
Yeah, I think it's about maybe it's a little more challenging than I expected it to be. I guess I just kind of thought, well, I would just gradually just move from full-time to part-time, and I just keep writing for places that I'd been writing for before. And as I mentioned, journalism is in a tough place right now. And so there were some places where I had been writing once I started my unretirement that I can't anymore because they're not taking freelance writing anymore. So that has proved a little more challenging. On the other hand, I found it much more invigorating and enjoyable than I thought it was going to be. I know there are a lot of people who, when they approach what they define as retirement, they get bored, they get sometimes depressed, they worry about what they're going to do with themselves. I don't have those worries. I'm I'm pretty busy almost every day, and as busy as I want to be. That I still have time to do nothing, but I don't like to be. I don't like to look at a calendar and see nothing on it. And I'm happy to say that my calendar doesn't look like that most days. And some of that time it means I'm doing work, but sometimes it means I'm volunteering and traveling and doing other things too.
Absolutely. I think that's the whole thing about the way so many of us are retiring these days. We're holding on to what we can and what we want to in terms of the job that defined us for so many years. But there's so much more freedom and choice than with the rest of the time, and that's the really fun part. Richard, you have interviewed experts and everyday Americans for decades. Are you seeing a change in how people are choosing to retire or doing retirement?
I'm starting to see that change. I think we still have for whatever reason, a traditional definition of retirement in our country. Most people, when they hear the word retirement, and employers, when they say the word retirement, they think it means you've left your full-time job and you're not working anymore, and your new life is your life of leisure. And that's great for some people, but it isn't right for a lot of people. And I think gradually people are saying, well, that's not really the way I want to spend my years. Sometimes people need to keep working financially. Sometimes they want to keep working because they enjoy the challenging their mind and learning new things and being with other people. So I feel like we're beginning to see it happening. But I'll tell you, there's still people I talk to when I'm interviewing them, about to interview them for my column, or writing about retirement or unretirement. They'll say to me, well, I thought you were retired. And I say, well, I retired from my full-time job, but I didn't retire from life. And that's the difference for me.
I know, I love your term unretirement and I hope it catches on, but I really see you as having a rolling retirement. You're kind of letting go of the things that don't serve you anymore and picking new things up. And I think identity is a big part of it. Are you, you come across as though you're really able to maintain that work identity while rolling into, the future identity of whatever comes next. Are you feeling that way as well?
I am, and I'm happy to say that I don't feel like identity has become a problem for me, though I know it is a problem for many people as they leave their full-time jobs and now wonder, who am I? And everybody thought of me as this, or I had that title or that status, and now I don't, and I don't know who I am. Because I'm continuing to do some of the kinds of things I did before, in some ways I'm keeping that identity. But I also tell you that when I volunteer every weekend at a place called Furniture Assist in New Jersey, they don't know anything about what I've done or what I do. To me, they just know me as the guy who shows up to volunteer. That's my identity there. And so I feel like I have a few different identities now.
Oh, isn't that fun? I love that. Yeah, it's true because nobody cares what I did for a job,
Yeah,
frankly. They're just like, you seem smart. Here, we're going to give you some stuff to do as a volunteer.
yeah,
So,
exactly. Right.
oh my gosh. Richard, you have now watched several generations retire. And I know, for me, I remember when my grandparents retired and they did the traditional thing. When my parents, well, when my stepfather retired, my mother didn't work from the time they got married. So, from your perspective, and this is way too broad a question, but what has changed?
I think the change is that people are starting to think that there's more to life than that there's lots of life after a full-time job. And I'm thinking about my father. He was a dentist and he retired in his 70s. And it wasn't necessarily by choice. It was that he just needed to close his business because he had a dental practice that was about referrals, and he was had been referred. People that came to him, he's an oral surgeon. People came to him because um, other dentists recommended them for the work that he did. But his friends were all retiring or dying or moving, and so he wasn't getting the referrals anymore. And so
Oh,
he closed his practice. But he also then became very depressed because for him, being a dentist was who he was, and not having that anymore made him wonder who he was anymore. And he didn't really have hobbies or passions. And he loved my mother. They did things together, but I think he really didn't know what his purpose was anymore. And I did what I could to try to help him, but it was a hard thing to do. I feel like that still happens for some people, but I think over time, because a lot of us are seeing that has happened with our parents or the people we know, we're trying to prevent it from happening ourselves.
yeah. Yeah, my husband and I still hang around a group with whom we graduated from high school. And one of the men, just because he worked for the city and that sort of thing, has actually been retired for 15 years now. And we're just like, what? But he just immediately jumped into so much volunteer work. It absolutely became his identity. He's happy as can be, and then his wife retired years later, and then they started taking care of grandchildren. It's just what I'm finding is in our generation, the boomer generation, everyone's doing it their own way. And to me, that seems like one of the biggest change is a generational change. Are you finding that as well?
I am, although I would say I don't think employers quite get that yet. I think
I would agree.
and that's a problem because for I think many employers think of their workforce as either they're working full time for us or they're not working for us.
Right.
And they don't many of them just don't understand the concept of, well, I'd like to keep working for you, but not as much. I'd like to, gradually have a phased retirement. I'd like to keep doing this maybe 3 days a week or change my job to do something else. And often the employers don't know how to deal with that. And I think that's frustrating for a lot of us who would like to keep working for our former employers,
Yeah.
and and that's just not even a possibility. So I feel like that needs to change. I think a lot of us get it, but a lot of our bosses don't get it.
I would agree. Are you finding now that actually the boomer generation hit our 60s, I'm going to say, was it back in it was it 24, or I'm sorry, yeah, 24 or 26. It went through 64. So back in 24, now the boomer graduating class is all in their 60s. The next group is coming up.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
your writing and in your podcast and that sort of thing, are you seeing anything different from the next group?
Yeah, so Gen X is right behind boomers, and some of them are already in retirement or getting close to it the way they define it. Uh, I'd say, on the one hand, I think they are more thoughtful in many cases about what that stage of life is going to be. On the other hand, I would say they are more scared than a lot of boomers are. And the reason for that is number one, Gen Xers by and large never had pensions at all. They started working when 401ks began. And so for them, their retirement savings is all on them. For a lot of boomers, many of us were lucky enough to still have some kind of a pension, even if it's not a big one, but some sort of guaranteed monthly income. And then we have to save on our own. So I feel like there's that concern for the Gen Xers that they may not have enough savings. I think they're also concerned about Social Security and Medicare. Now, we're all concerned about that, but the solvency issues are ones that are supposed to happen in 6, 7, 8 years from now. And all the experts I talk to say, well, when Congress and whoever the president is get around to fixing these programs, most likely they're not going to change things for people who are already collecting Social Security or already on Medicare, but it will affect the people who are not quite there yet. And those are the Gen X people. And so a lot of people in Gen X are very concerned about, will Social Security be there for them? Some of them don't believe it'll be there at all. I think they're wrong, but they do think there may be a retirement benefit cut, and I think that's quite possible. And they're concerned about what Medicare is going to look like when they're there. So I know that there's more concerns by Gen Xers than boomers, and I think a lot of them are understandable.
Yeah. Yeah, I just remember back in the 70s, my grandmother tried to give her Social Security back and they wouldn't take it. And and now, depending upon what you get for Social Security, kind of it affects a great, or what your other income is affects your Social Security and that sort of thing. And I like that Social Security to some extent has changed with the times. And I believe that's possible. I don't think it's an all or none kind of thing. And so I'm hoping that the government just continues looking at how can we provide that, somewhat of a safety net into the future. So, but we'll see what's happening. The interesting thing along with Social Security is life expectancy. I don't know if you talk about that specifically in your writings, but we're living a lot longer.
That's true. Well, many of us are. Not everyone is, and a lot of it depends on your income and your health. But certainly, overall, people are living longer lives than they used to. And so, in the past, decades ago, if people retired at 65, chances are they wouldn't be living many more years. Now, if you there's a good chance that you're going to live into your 80s, possibly your 90s, maybe into your hundreds. And so that also, on the one hand, it's exciting to have all those extra years and to be able to use those and do things. On the other hand, it's also scary financially because that means maybe I need 20 or 30 years to have enough money to pay for that. And how am I going to do it? And living longer may mean a greater chance of needing long-term care, and that's very expensive, and that's not covered by Medicare by and large. So there's good and bad of longer lives. I think more good than bad, but still some concerns.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And especially for the people without extended family, those are the folks I worry about, and I'm fortunate to have family. The generations before me had family to help with them, but in my family. But let's get into the really fun stuff. Tell me how this whole unretirement came about. How'd you come up with it and all that?
Well, I'll first tell you that the word wasn't my own. I first heard about it from a friend of mine, another journalist named Chris Farrell. He's a wonderful writer. People may have heard him on National Public Radio and Public Radio's Marketplace, a few other places. Anyway, he wrote a wonderful book called Unretirement a few years ago, and it was about how boomers were rethinking retirement. And I thought it was a really interesting concept. And then I started hearing more people using the word. Now, some people call it semi-retirement. That's
Mm,
fine.
mm.
Um, and I mentioned phased retirement as well. There are different words for it. But I think what it's really saying is when you use the word retirement, people assume that means no work at all. And for me, unretirement means working sometimes, but not all the time, and maybe not the kind of work you did, and maybe not with the people you did before, but doing it in some ways to give you some income, but also some pleasure as well.
Absolutely. And this is an aside, but I'm going to ask because I'm thinking about it. Like, have you taken up anything completely new in your unretirement phase? I mean, just totally completely. What? What? Tell me.
Yeah, well, I have, and sometimes successfully and sometimes not successfully. Uh, and what my advice for people is not to beat yourself up if you try something and then it doesn't work out or you don't like it.
Uh,
This is a period of time where you can experiment and you're lucky to have the time to do it. So I thought it might be fun to try to do voiceover work. I've done a podcast for a number of years, and I thought, well, I like to talk and I can read, and how hard could it be? So I took some classes and I got a certificate and I bought all the equipment to do voiceover work. What I didn't understand was to really be a good voiceover person, particularly when you're starting out, you really have to be a skilled audio engineer because there's a lot you need to figure out technically to do it right. And that is not one of my great skills. And so, hard as I would try to do this, I found it very frustrating. And so I gave up on it. So I'm glad I tried. I recommend it to people who feel like that's right for them. It wasn't right for me, and I've moved on.
yeah. Oh, fascinating. Well, let's get back to unretirement because I believe you teach a class on it, do you not?
Yeah, I've taught a class at NYU, a master class in unretirement. It's a virtual class. Most of the students have been people in their 50s and 60s, some of whom are still working full time, some of them have just left their jobs. and they're trying to figure out this next stage of life. So what I've been trying to do, explain to them as best as I could, how I define it, what to be thinking about financially, but also psychologically, because there's a lot to think about beyond just the money.
Absolutely. Yeah, actually, the name of my company is Sunday Afternoon, and my tagline is the heart and soul of retirement.
Mhm.
Because I do believe there's a lot of information out there about money management and housing decisions and that sort of thing. And I do like dealing with, there are a lot of emotions that go into a lot of stuff in our retirement years. Have you heard back from folks who have taken it, or has anyone said? I mean, I'm sure everyone said thank you because it's just helping them think differently.
Well, when I did the second time I taught the class, I brought back some of the students from the first class to
Ah,
talk to the students in the second class so they could hear what the experience has been. And it was interesting to hear people from the first time who weren't quite sure what they were going to do were now starting to figure it out. And when I say starting to figure it out, I'm still starting to figure it out. It's the sort of thing that's going to change over time. So you may
mhm,
think when you start your own retirement, I'm going to work this amount, this number of hours, or these days a week, or that sort of thing, and I'm going to work for these people or this kind of job. And that may be how you start. And over time, you may find either it's more work than you want, or less work than you want, or you don't like that kind of work, or you can't get that kind of work. And so over time, you may change your how you're living your own retirement, and that's perfectly fine. So I think people sometimes worry that, well, gee, I've got to decide exactly what I'm going to do, and that's the way it's going to have to be. But in fact, it doesn't have to stay that way, and it won't.
mhm. Yeah, I tend to be the kind of person who just jumps into something new and then figures out if I like it, and drives my husband crazy. So a few years ago, I just jumped into the race for village council here where we live in Columbus and got elected because there are only 2,000 people in the village, and they're like, good, somebody wants to do this.
Mhm.
But it's so much fun. For me, it rounded out. I started my career in for-profit. I then worked in nonprofit. And now I've worked in government. So I consider myself incredibly well-rounded.
Right.
But for me, it was so much fun. I went from for-profit to nonprofit because I wanted to work for mission and improving the world, as opposed to, frankly, just a paycheck. And then government really kind of helps round that out quite a bit. Working does mean money, but it means so much more than that. So let me ask you if you could speak to really the role that purpose plays, and in you and in what the people you've been talking to are saying.
Well, I think meaning and purpose are really important for a lot of people at this stage of life. But I would also say a lot of people don't think about that very much and really need to. And sometimes they get scared because they think of purpose as being what people call big P purpose, meaning I've got to come up with something where I'm going to change the world. And maybe you're able to do that, and good luck if you are, but most of us can't do that. We go for a little P purpose, and that's perfectly fine. And sometimes we find it in different places. So I found that well, I'll get to my volunteering in a moment, but there's a wonderful book called Retirement Stepping Stones by a financial planner named Tony Hickson, Hixon. And it's all about finding meaning and purpose in retirement. And he wrote the book due to a very sad experience. His mother had been a hospice nurse for many years, loved doing it, retired. He consulted her to help her see whether she could afford to leave her job. He said, "Yeah, you're fine. You can do it." So she did, but she hadn't thought at all about what she'd be doing next.
Mm,
Because of that, she started spiraling downhill mentally because she was just so depressed. She didn't have meaning or purpose in her life. And sadly, she ultimately took her own life. And Tony wrote this book so that that wouldn't happen to other people. And this book is all about how important it is to think about where will you get meaning and purpose when you don't have your full-time job, and how to do it. And I really recommend people who are sort of thinking about this and maybe struggling with that idea to get the book. Now, in my case, I mentioned I do volunteering. I do it in two different ways, and I get great pleasure and meaning and purpose out of it in both of them, but for very different reasons. So one is I'm now on the board of a nonprofit called the American Society of Journalists and Authors, or ASJA, and it's a national group of freelancers. And as I mentioned, this is a tough time for freelancers these days. So I wanted to see if I could be helpful. And I'm on the board, and what I help them do is try to match them up with editors who are looking for people like them to write. I also help with the awards program to showcase great writing by freelance writers. And I'm finding that very fulfilling. And I'm doing that because freelancers were very good to me over my career at Money Magazine and Next Avenue. Many of the articles that I edited were written by freelancers, and we wouldn't have had a magazine or a website without their work. So I wanted to find a way to try to give back to those kinds of people who've been so helpful to me. That's one thing I do, and that I do that. There's a board meeting every month. There are other meetings I have. Um, I don't know exact. I know sometimes when I have to show up for something virtually, but otherwise it sort of happens whenever I need to be doing something. The other volunteering I do is more specific about time. Every Saturday and Sunday, when I'm around, I go to a place near me called Furniture Assist. And this is a place in New Jersey where on Saturdays, people who really need furniture, clothes, household items, and can't afford it, often because they've had a fire or a flood or they've lost their jobs or whatever it may be, they just can't afford these things. So social service agencies connect them with Furniture Assist. They come in with an appointment and we help them find what they're looking for. And they can take anything away that they have can fit into their truck or their car. We help them take it out and help them find it and then take it out. And the things that they're getting are they get from the people who come to us on Sundays. And those are the suburban New Jersey people who have things that they no longer want or need anymore from their own homes or their parents or their in-laws or families. And so we're helping them get rid of things that they don't want, but somebody else might. And then we're helping people who really do need these things. So I find that really fulfilling. And I can see how grateful people are both when they get the things they need and when they get rid of the things they don't need.
Yes, exactly. That's amazing. And what I love is you're a great example of how you have kept one foot in your profession and then move the other foot, and I don't know, maybe you did some of this when you were working full time too, into real community-based support. Was it purposeful, or did you, kind of look up one day and go, wow, look at what I did?
Um, I don't know. I didn't, wasn't that intentional.
Hmm.
Furniture Assist was a place that I had actually donated to, and,
Ah,
and I liked what they were doing. And then I thought, well, gee, now that I've got time, maybe I can be helpful. And I asked them, could I volunteer? And they said they would love it. And it's an all volunteer organization. And it's interesting. The people who volunteer there on weekends are two types of people. They're either retired people like me, or they are young people in high school or junior high school who want to do or need to do community service. There are also a few other people who come because they need to do community service for various reasons. But it's really enjoyable to do volunteering with older and younger people together because so often we tend to hang out only with people our own age, more or less, and we tend to not spend much time with younger people or them with us. So I'm glad to have that opportunity. And then the freelancing, the ASGA, I've been a member of that group for a while, and there again, I thought, well, gee, now I've got time, maybe I can be helpful. And then one day, one of them, somebody who works there, said, "Would you be on one of our committees?" And I said, "Sure." And then they said, "Would you be on the board?" And I said, "Sure." So so sometimes it's a matter of being asked. Now, sometimes just because somebody asks you doesn't mean you have to say yes. And I think that's one problem that some people face in retirement is so many people want them to do things, whether it's work or volunteering, and they don't want to say no. And then they overdo it, or they end up saying yes to things that they don't want to be doing. So I would say be a little particular and don't feel compelled to say yes to everybody. If you want to say no, be polite about it. If you can suggest somebody else who could do what they're looking for, try to do that. But just don't overdo it. And you may find that you'll take on a job or volunteering that you just don't enjoy doing. And
hmm
so you may give that up, and that's okay too.
hmm hmm Yeah, I was a nonprofit executive director for like the second 20 years of my career. And I just watch so many organizations just burn people out because they get hold of someone who's willing to do something and then they just work them to death. And
Yeah.
so I have to admit, when it comes to just straight up volunteering, I'm remarkably choosy. Of course, for my elected position, I make a big $130 a month. But the rest of it, I'm really very careful. And it is interesting because my perception, you can tell me what you have found is a lot of us wind up volunteering or maybe working part-time in our career, so we get to keep a little bit of that identity going while at the same time then expanding potentially into something else.
I think that's true for some people, but I think there are also a lot of people who say while they're working full time, I'd love to volunteer, but I just don't have the time. My nights or my weekends, I need to
Yeah.
help my kids with their homework, or I want to spend time with my spouse or my partner. Sometimes that's not necessarily true. Maybe they really could make the time to volunteer, they just don't. But a lot of times, they really just don't have the time,
Yeah.
and this stage of life gives you the time, and you should take advantage of that.
It really does. It's amazing. And every so often, when I find myself with a free day, I'll be like, oh, should I be doing something? And I have to remember I've packed plenty in at this point.
Yeah.
And just the lack of free time in America today, I try to remind myself to really treasure that because we live a much busier lifestyle, in my opinion, than we did even when I was raising my daughter.
Mhm.
Um, so, gosh, I mean, you've done so much. Uh, you are a wealth of knowledge when it comes to money issues and growing older and that sort of thing. So I'll start with what financial mistakes maybe do you continue to see people making, or maybe new ones?
Huh. Well, I guess there are a few of them. One is not meeting with a financial advisor. A lot of us think, well, either it's too complicated or I'm not really that interested, or I don't understand it. And so we sort of do the best we can on our own. But there are a lot of really talented financial advisors out there who specialize in this, who know a lot more than the rest of us do,
Hmm.
um, and who can really help us to see whether we're on track, and if we're not on track, to help get us on track, to help us think about what we should be doing or could be doing that we're not doing. And I'm not talking about just about saving and investing. Well, that's part of it, but it's also about insurance and healthcare costs and work and purpose, that sort of thing. So I would say one thing is, if you don't have a financial advisor and you're in your 50s or 60s, this is probably a good time to sit down and meet with one, even if it's just for a one-time meeting, just to say, here's where I am. What do you think? But it may be ideally a relationship you're going to build where you're going to be meeting with them on a regular basis to help you with this stage of life. Another problem I would say that people have, a mistake that they make, is they think so much about where to be saving and investing their money to make it grow, which is important. They don't think very much about, well, how can I take the money out when I need to take it out? And they're nervous about taking money out because they're afraid, well, what if I run out of money? And that's a fair concern. None of us know how long we're going to live. On the other hand, a lot of people could spend more than they do, the experts say, uh, and and should be if they only knew how to do it. And so it helps people to know there are different times and places you could take money out of this account rather than that account, and how much to take. There are certain rules of thumb. It's complicated and there's no right answer for everybody, but I'd say the decumulation is as important for people as accumulation, but it's not something that a lot of people think about. And I would say a lot of advisors are not as helpful as they could be because they're so focused on growing the assets of their clients because they get paid by the growth of their assets, and they don't want to see that money going away because that means less money for them. So, part of it is the way the financial system is structured, and part of it is that we just need to think more about it.
Well, and your point is so well taken. My husband and I have pretty much well, we have always filed jointly. And then it reached a point in retirement where financially on paper, it looked smarter for us to file separately. So we
Uh,
did for a year. and I don't understand this entirely, but somehow that affected Irma.
Huh?
You can speak to that far more intelligently than I do. But once we got our accountant together with both of our financial planners, they were like, no, you guys need to file
Right.
jointly for a while. And things like that, normal Americans, there's so much like that, I assume, out there that can wind up actually biting you and you just don't know it's there.
Yeah, well, you bring up an important topic, and that's Medicare. And for those in your audience who might not know the word IRMA, I'm happy that you don't, but here's why you may need to. IRMA is an acronym that basically stands for the extra premiums you may have to pay for the cost of premiums for Medicare based on your income. And they look back 2 years. So they say, well, what was your income in 2024? If it was over a certain amount, you're going to have to pay a higher Medicare premium than if it was under that. Now, many people are not affected by that, but some people are. And the more money that you make, the higher your premiums are going to be, and they can get very expensive. So I would say if you have significant income 2 years before today and you're over 65, you'll need to do the IRMA numbers to see. And I think probably what happened in your case was that the two of you together, there are different figures for IRMA for married couples than for single people filing or people filing singly. And I think that the IRMA numbers just worked out better for you as a couple than as a single person is probably what happened. But Medicare is an area that most people don't know very much about. They don't want to know much about it. They assume Medicare covers everything. They don't think it costs anything. And they are unpleasantly surprised to find that, in fact, it doesn't cover everything. And there are costs, healthcare costs that continue into retirement, partly sometimes Medicare premiums and deductibles and copays, but sometimes things that Medicare just doesn't cover. So I really encourage people to learn about Medicare. The Medicare website is pretty good. And they have a free annual booklet that you can either get printed or read it online called Medicare and You, and it really explains a lot of things. You may want to, if you're over 65 or getting close to it, you may want to work with a Medicare advisor who can help you choose the right kind of prescription drug plan and maybe a Medigap plan, maybe a Medicare Advantage plan. It's very complicated. There's a lot to learn, but it's really important to understand it.
It really is. My husband has a master's from Auburn. I got my doctorate at Franklin University here in Columbus. We find it unbelievably confusing.
It
And we're
is.
like, what about people? It's just unreal and very surprising. And hopefully that's something over the course of time, especially now that all the baby boomers are in this, hopefully it will get the attention to get it I'm going to say cleaned up, but to get it so that it's just easier to understand.
Yeah.
I it was awful. The transition was awful.
Well, part of the reason is it's a program that, it started with a great idea back in the 1930s to help people with healthcare costs when they get over 65. And over the years, the program has changed and evolved, and in some ways for the better, for good reasons. Then when they add a prescription drug plan, that sort of thing. But every time they've made changes, they've made the system also more complicated for the rest of us. So what we're dealing with now is a piecemeal program with lots of different pieces,
Yes.
and it makes it very hard for the average person to understand all of it. There's part A, part B, part C, part D, and if they were starting all over again, they'd probably do it all at one time and say, "Here's how it works," and there wouldn't be so many parts. But
Yeah.
that's not the way it is. Yeah, sad.
No. No, kind of not the way government works, I'm learning, unfortunately. So you've been writing and sharing great information with people for decades. Is there any particular piece of information, or I hate to call it advice because that's a more of a legal term, but any piece of retirement sharing that you've changed your mind on over the years?
That's an interesting question. Um, Maybe about Social Security and claiming Social Security. So
Mm,
the economists and some financial advisors strongly recommend people wait till age 70 to start claiming Social Security. And the reason they say this is because for every year that you delay claiming until age 70, the size of your Social Security check is higher. So I understand mathematically why that makes sense and financially even why it makes sense. But I've come to understand realistically that most people can't afford to do that. And in fact, most people start claiming Social Security at age 62, the earliest that they can, and then a lot claim at 65 or 66 or 67. Not many people start claiming until age 70. And so I guess what's changed for me is I used to believe and tell people, wait till you're 70. Now that I'm close to that, seeing what that really means, I'm realizing that that's just not realistic for a lot of people. And yes, it may mean a smaller benefit, but for a lot of us, we need some Social Security income at age, if not 62, then maybe 65, 66, 67. And even if it means it's going to be smaller than waiting, it does give you peace of mind and maybe the income that you really do need at this stage of life. So I'd say that that's been a change for me.
Some of our friends started taking it as soon as they could, kind of under the theory of, I'm going to go ahead and take this and, as much as possible, save it, because I would rather have it and invest it myself as opposed to, wait. And also, honestly, you get retired. And I don't mean to be morbid, but you start watching friends die, and it's like, nope, I'm gonna live the best life I can now, and so I'm gonna go ahead and go for it. So I think that is, it's more of a decision maybe than it used to be in the past. So
Yeah, there are the people who have the what if I get hit by a bus mentality, and they want to say, well, gee, I paid into it for all these years. I don't want to find I'm going to die and not ever get it. So I'm going to get it to be sure that I get it. And,
right,
you know, I can understand that. First of all, I think the odds of being hit by a bus are pretty small, but things can happen.
yes,
But I do think that if you need the money, certainly by all means, you should claim it, take it, it's yours. But if you don't have to, and you
yeah,
can avoid delaying even a few years, it will help you financially. But it does, I think, does make a lot of people happier to know that there's this steady income every month. Now, you're
yes,
talking about people
yeah,
who say, well, they'll take the money and invest it. Well, first of all, I hope they do. I wish them luck. And fortunately, the stock market's been very good for the past few years. Not every year, but many years. But many of us are not really great investors, or don't remember to do it, or we get nervous when the market goes down. Social Security is essentially an annuity of guaranteed income every month. So, as much as you may be able to earn more in the stock market, there's no guarantee that you will. And you do know that there's a guarantee here when you have the money in Social Security. So it's a personal decision. I'm not saying to do one or the other. I'm just
yep,
saying, don't assume that you're going to earn more than the Social Security would be getting for you every month either.
yeah, yeah. I want to circle back to your work with the journalists because I did not realize that the ASJA was for freelancers.
Yes,
And that is undoubtedly a very different category of journalists than those who still happen to be working for organizations large and small. What are getting a little more into it, let's talk about some of the changes that journalists have gone through, print to digital, and then of course we'll get a little bit into AI, but we could talk all day on that. But life's really changed. And for the freelancers, I'm sure even more so because they're not part of a large organization that is kind of helping them through that change.
that's right. Well, when you have a full-time job as a journalist, as I was lucky to have for many years, not only do you have a salary where you know what you're going to be earning every week, every month, you also get benefits in many cases, health insurance often, and a 401(k) plan often, and that sort of thing. When, but what's happened is many of the places that had hired full-time journalists have stopped doing that, or they've closed altogether. And so then many of these people need to become freelancers. Now, freelancers, the great thing about being a freelancer is you can write for, if you can get the assignments for many different places and perhaps earn more than you earned before, but it's unsteady, it's not guaranteed, and it does not come with health benefits or and savings benefits. So you're on your own in many ways. And a lot of people are becoming freelancers not by choice, but because the field just doesn't allow them to keep working full time. Some are doing it by choice, and they're happy to do that. But at the same time, even places that were taking freelancers, more of them are now saying we're not taking as many of them. We're not paying them as much as we used to. Sometimes we're not doing it at all. Sometimes it's because of AI, as you said. Sometimes it's just because their budgets are stretched and they don't have the subscription income and the advertising income coming in, and so they just can't afford to keep those people. So it's become a little tougher. The other part of ASJA, American Society of Journalists and Authors, that we represent is the A part, the authors. So we're a group for nonfiction authors, and many people are finding great satisfaction uh, in writing nonfiction books. It's also a hard thing to do, hard to find a publisher, but some people are doing it self-publishing these days too. And so we're trying to help them, find agents and get books published if we can do that too.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, there are so many changes, and I was very fortunate while working on my dissertation to be introduced to AI, and almost 3 years ago. And it never seemed like anything other than a tool to me. It was never going to write my dissertation for me. And how it sort of exploded into, oh, now we don't need humans anymore. It's just crazy. You almost talk about that all the time.
Yeah, it's always the number one topic of conversation at journalism conferences and seminars. And, uh, in some ways, it's a very helpful tool for those of us who are doing research of any kind because you can quickly get answers to your questions very fast and often in great detail. And usually it's accurate, but it's not accurate. Um, but as you say, it is not. Uh, it can't write the way people can write, and it shouldn't be used in that way. And sadly, some people are losing opportunities and jobs because employers are saying, well, I may not be able to get the article as good as it would have been, but I can get an article, and that's all I care about. And that's what's concerning me right now is the employers who are looking at it in that respect. It's not good for the audience, for the consumers, let alone for the journalists.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a strange time, and there's so much to be thinking about. And I find I have to just focus on one or two things in the world in general. I can't get involved in everything that's going on. And I assume that journalists have some sort of lobbying or something like that to try to help shape the future of their industry and then probably AI in general.
Yeah, we're trying to, but it's like pushing a rock up the hill.
Oh yeah.
AI is here, and it's only going to be more prevalent in the future. So we're not trying to, kill it. That would be a mistake for
Right.
lots of reasons. But
Right.
we want to be protected as much as possible. A lot of authors are finding that they've written a book, and suddenly they're seeing versions of that book being sold online that look like their book, but it is not their book, and it's an AI version of the book, and people are buying that book instead because it's cheaper. They can buy that book for $5 instead of their book for $25. It's not the same book, and that's a really hard thing to stop right now, and we're trying to do what we can to stop it, but it's almost impossible.
Oh my gosh, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, I could talk to you all day, but I'm most curious now. I mean, you're still writing, you're teaching, you're podcasting, you're still reviewing books, I believe.
Yeah.
So, what's next?
I'm not sure what's next. That's me in a few years or so. I'm planning at the moment to keep doing what I'm doing. Um, I have a feeling I'll probably be doing less writing with every passing year. I don't know exactly, but I feel like I want to do a little less work and a little more other things. Uh, we know my wife and I live in New Jersey. We're going to be moving to California at some point because we've got two grown sons and two grandchildren out there, and they are never leaving, and we want to see them. So what's next? We know at some point we're going to be moving there. We're not
Yeah.
sure when, and
Yep.
that will change things, I'm sure, in many great ways and some surprising ways. Uh,
Yes.
so I know that's coming. I just don't know what it'll be like or exactly when.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Well, currently, so what projects are either that you're either working on or that you see on the horizon or that you've even dreamed up are currently getting you excited and you can't wait to work on them?
Well, I really love writing my view from unretirement column for Market Watch. I do that every 2 weeks, and it's usually something that I've chosen to write about. I ask my editor if she'll let me, and it can be on anything. I wrote recently about the Social Security earnings test and what that means and how it works, because a lot of people are confused by that, not understanding what how Social Security benefits may be withheld for them temporarily if they earn more than a certain amount of money while they're claiming Social Security. So I wrote a piece about that. But then I just wrote a piece that's going to be going live very soon about travel insurance and how important that is for retired people who are traveling, but often they don't think about buying it. And I just learned, having an experience where I actually needed it and having bought it, how grateful I was that I did. Um, and so what I like about that is I'm writing about all kinds of things, and I never quite know from month to month what they'll be about. I really enjoy doing the Friends Talk Money podcast. I do that every few weeks with my two co-hosts, Pam Kruger and Terry Savage. And this is to try to help people over 50 understand how to manage their money better. And so that's great fun. I really love doing that. And then I'm lucky to be able to write for places like the Stanford Center on Longevity Magazine, for Kiplinger Magazine, for AARP. And every now and then somebody will ask me if I'll do some writing for them. A website called Baby List asked me if I would write a piece for grandparents about what grandparents should know about 529s and Trump accounts for their grandchildren. So I said, sure. So I did that. So now I'm a Baby List writer.
No, I love that. And I meant to circle back to that, but everything you said in this has been so interesting. I do feel that it is a blessing and a burden that we are the generation with the most wealth. And in terms of helping our parents, for those of us who still have parents, and helping them understand how to pass down whatever wealth they have, but especially with us. What do we do with the wealth that has either been accumulated or inherited or something like that? So that sounds like that's the beginning of that. And I'll tell you, my stepfather was the most brilliant man I ever had the pleasure of knowing, personally. He didn't teach us a thing.
Right.
And I would have given anything because I think everyone knows, save 10%, um, um, uh, contribute to your 401k and make sure to get the match and that sort of thing. But what do you do once you have some money? And I think what you said in particular about having a planner was critical, but really focusing on, okay, you guys, now you have a lot of money. Here are some things to think about. And I'm hoping that's also part of your baby list.
Yeah, well, as soon as my our first grandchild was born, I wanted to open a 529 plan for her for college because college is very expensive now and it's only going to get more expensive. And what I learned, which I didn't know, but your audience may find it interesting to know this, we'd had a 529 for both of our sons who are now in their 30s, and one of them was lucky enough to get a college scholarship and didn't need all the money that I had in his 529, so that money's been sitting there and not being used. What I was able to do is I took the money that I didn't use for him and I put it into a 529 for his daughter. And so now she has his 529 money growing. And so that was a way I felt like I could be useful. And then when our second grandchild was just born, I just opened a 529 for him. My feeling about this is if you can afford to, uh, whatever you can do to help your children and maybe their children today while you're alive, while you can see it happening, you should do it. It's very nice to leave an inheritance. If you can do that, that's great. One day they'll be really grateful. You won't be here to see it, but they may need your help right now to buy a house, to pay for buying a car, to pay for a kid's college education, whatever it may be. It's a really tough time for a lot of people in their 20s and 30s. And if you can be helpful for them, they will be really grateful. And most of us don't need to worry about giving them so much that we're going to be um, having to deal with the gift tax. That's usually not an issue, but they will be so grateful, and you'll feel good too, knowing that you've been making a difference and you can see the effect of it right now.
I think I think that's so critical and I agree. And my husband and I feel the same way, leaving him a bunch of money, hopefully 20 to 25 years from now, is not nearly as beneficial as what can we do now. And we do try to do that. But, you know this better than I do. The people listening need to know there can be some tax ramifications. There might be better and worse ways of helping them. And so, again, back to work with a planner who can really guide you in the right ways to do that. So, Richard, would you be willing to do a lightning round?
Sure, I'll try.
Okay, hopefully you're familiar with these. I'm gonna say something and you give me a word or
Okay.
give me a quick response. So, retirement in one word.
Exciting.
Yes. Best career advice you ever received.
Um, if you're not happy with the job, find another job.
Oh. Biggest misconception about aging.
That it is only about being frail and decrepitude. That in fact, while you will have more health issues as you get older, that's not all that you'll have as you get older.
Yeah, I like the wisdom that comes with it. Kind of balances things out. So morning person or night owl?
I'd say morning person. I get up pretty early each day, and I like to start my day as soon as I can. And um, I'll do sometimes I'll do maybe a little work at night, but mostly nighttime is reading or watching television or going out to dinner with my wife. Yeah.
Mm. One book everyone over 60 should read.
Oh, gee, I read so many books and I like so many of them. Uh, There's a very great book by Christine Benz called How to Retire. She is a writer from Morningstar, and she talked to 20 really smart people about retirement, and it tells you a little bit about a lot of different things. I think that's a really helpful book.
Wow, fabulous. Best financial habit.
I guess I would say I've done this for many years now. I have an automated uh, transfer from my bank account into a mutual fund. And every month, I don't think about it. Every month, the same amount of money is going from my bank account into this mutual fund. And it's not a lot any month, but over the many years, it's grown into a sizable amount. And I don't think about it. And I'm so glad I started doing it.
Yes, yes. Biggest risk worth taking over 60.
Trying something new.
Mm,
A lot of people are afraid to try something new. They're afraid they're going to fail, or they wonder what's going to happen, or you know. And I'm not saying take a big risk, and I'm not saying take a large financial risk, but
mm,
you can do things you haven't done before and see how they go, and maybe you'll be really pleasantly surprised.
Like starting a podcast.
Indeed.
And finally, one thing you wish you'd known at age 50.
Uh, that I need to think more about life after a full-time job. I think I probably hadn't thought much about that in my early 50s, even late 50s, and I started thinking about it in my early 60s. I wish I'd started thinking about it a little bit earlier.
I love it. Well, Richard Eisenberg, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. This has been fascinating. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners? Maybe something I didn't think to ask about or something that came to mind?
Well, I just want to thank you for doing this, for having your podcast, and for helping, let people know what they could learn that'd be helpful for them. I think people really need guidance, advice. A lot of us are trying to figure it out on our own. A lot of us don't have any mentors when it comes to retirement or unretirement. So people like you are doing a really great service. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. I'm loving it. It is making my retirement years so much more fun. This podcast is called Reinventing Retirement. And if anyone listening is standing on the edge of retirement and wondering what's next, what would you tell them? Not you, Richard.
Yeah.
You have given us so much good information. And again, I can't thank you enough. And thank you, listeners, for listening to Reinventing Retirement.
Stay well.
You too. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Reinventing Retirement. I hope today's journey has sparked some ideas for your own next chapter, whether that's exploring a long-held passion, picking up a new skill, or simply reimagining what this stage of life can look like. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss future episodes. And if you know someone who could use a little inspiration on their own retirement journey, share this podcast with them. Until next time, here's to creating a retirement that's not an ending, but a reinvention.